YouTube. In the previous video, we talked about how a 1 by 1 by 1 cube is called 1 unit cubed. And the unit can be anything you want. So if you're saying 1 inches cubed, just means it's a 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch deep box. So we'd call that 1 inches cubed. And that would be the volume. And if we had an object that had like 2 of those, exact same things, like that. Let's say this is an object together. We'd say that volume is 2 inches cubed. So we can measure the volume of something by counting how many cubes make up the whole thing. We first define a cube. In this case, we're choosing inches, 1 inch cubed. Then we just count how many the object has. Now, sometimes you can just visibly count them because they're broken up nicely for us. But sometimes you kind of have to use a formula because it's not obvious how many there are. So let's see an example. So let's say we have a rectangular prism like this. So it's just like think of like a tissue box or something, right? That'd be an example. We're going to try to count how many 1 by 1 cubes. So how many of these are in here, right? So here's what we're going to do. Let's first figure out how what the dimensions are. So what is the length? What is the width? Call that W. L for length. And what is the height? Right? And the formula for volume of a rectangular prism is length times width times height. So let's go ahead and assign some numbers to these things. Let's say the length is 1, 2, 3. So the length is 3 inches. Let's say the height is actually going to be 2 inches. So 1, 2. So the height is 2 inches. Length is 3 inches. Okay. And the width across here, let's say that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's say the width is 4. Now once you actually have all 3 of these, the answer is just to multiply them all. So you just plug them in. Well, the length is 3, the height is 2, and the width is 4. So we do 3 times 4 times 2. 3 times 4 is 12. 12 times 2 is 24. So the answer is 24 units cubed. In this case, we're using inches, so it would be 24 inches cubed. That is the volume. But what this means is that there are literally 24 of these little cubes in here. So let's see why this formula works. So we're going to try to see if we can kind of picture why this formula is counting correctly how many of these cubes are in there. So let's break it down a little bit. Let's just look at how many are on one face. So like one side, we call them faces. All right, so the number on this face, well, there's 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch. So it's 3 inches across here. And then it's 2 inches tall, like this. So when you go 1 inch down, and then you have this 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch, this is going to create 3 just squares. And if you go 1 inch lower, you're going to create another 3 inch squares that are both 1 by 1. Hopefully you see that. So just on one of these faces, you have 6 inches squared. You have 6 of these squares, 1 inch by 1 inch squares. Okay. So what we really care about though is how many inches cubed. We need it to be 1 inch by 1 inch, which we have, but also by 1 inch deep. We need to count how many of those we have. Okay. So we have 6 inches squared. We have 6 of these squares right here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to kind of imagine just kind of, what if we like cut into this box just 1 inch in, like that. And remember, it's going to be 4 inches long in total because that's the width. So we're going to cut just 1 inch in. Let's think about what happens to each of these little squares. Well, the squares are already 1 by 1, but now we're cutting 1 inch deep in. So what we're going to make is a square that's 1 by 1 by 1. We're going to create 1 inches cubed. And for each square on here, If you cut 1 inch into the box, they're going to be 1 by 1, and they're going to be 1 deep into the box, and that's where you cut it. And this is going to be 1 by 1, and then 1 deep, and 1 by 1, and 1 deep. Each one of these things will be like that. So imagine, like, let's say this is the side of the box. Ready? Right? And what we're doing is we're like just picturing, not going the full 4 because it's 4 inches, wide. That's the width. But we're just picturing just going 1 inch of it. And if you cut there, what you'll create is a 1 by 1 and 1 deep object. And you're going to create a cube, actually. You're going to create a cube for each of these things. So you would create 6 cubes by just going 1 inch over. Well, guess what? That space that you just kind of cut is a space of 6 inches cubed. That would be the volume of it. So each of these sides are 1 inch by 1 inch, and you're going 1 inch deep, so they're creating 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch cubed. Well, that's 1 inch cubes, and each one makes that. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Now you're going to do that again because it's not just 1 inch deep, it's 4 inches deep. So you're going to go again another inch. And if you cut into it, it's going to create another stack, another little slice a piece, which is also going to be 6 inches cubed in this little section. Then you're going to go another inch over, cut another one. You're going to create another 6 inches cubed. And then the last one will be 6 inches cubed. You're going to do that 4 times for each inch. So for each inch you go over, you're going to make 6 inches cubed. You're going to do it 4 times, so it's 6 times 4, which is 24 inches cubed, which is exactly our answer. So as a very quick recap, basically when you do length times width, let's say, or let's say like you do length times height, right? So we did the 3 times the 2. You just get the number of squares on one of the faces, right? So you get the number of squares, say on this face, that's 3 times 2. That's the number of squares. So that's what the length times width height gives you. So that's that 6. And then when you multiply by the width, the 4, it's how many times you get to go 1 inch over. And that ends up being how many cubes you make. So if the width is only 1, it'd be 6 times 1 inch over. You'd only make 6 inches cubed in total. If it was width of 2, you'd actually get to do the same thing twice. If you go once, create 6 inches cubed, and you go 1 inch deeper, create an exact copy, another 6 inches cubed. Or 12, so 6 and 6. So basically when you multiply the length and the height, so we'd say length times height, will give you the number of squares on a side, and then times the width, that actually tells you how many times you get to copy that. So this length times height was for a 6, and it was 4 deep. So 6 times 4 is a total of 24 inches cubed. Anyway, I hope that was hope that was informative and helpful, and that you can see why that formula works. And at the end of the day, no matter whether you're counting cubes by your eyes visually or using the formula, you're still just counting cubes. But the formula is very helpful for common shapes that we're used to seeing. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.